Some creatures survive not because they are wanted, but because they refuse to stop showing up. They are the strays, the cast-offs, the broken things left in the rain. They do not ask for warmth, for they have forgotten what it feels like. They do not beg for mercy, for they know the world has none to spare. But if you show up for them, if you stand in the dark and the cold and the wet, night after night, asking for nothing in return, they might just let you see the beating heart beneath the scars. Gianna Ferro knew about strays. She was 27 years old, a veterinary technician at the East Side 24-hour animal emergency clinic, and her life was measured in the steady, relentless rhythm of showing up. The clinic smelled perpetually of bleach, fear, and the metallic tang of blood. The clock on the wall above the reception desk was a cheap plastic thing that ticked with a heavy, syncopated thud, marking the hours between dusk and midnight. When her shift finally ended at 11 o'clock, the world outside was always swallowed by the heavy, oppressive velvet of the city night. Gianna would scrub her hands until her fair, white, glowing, clean, attractive skin was flushed and raw. She would pull off her gloves, the latex snapping against her wrists, and she would look at her reflection in the darkened glass of the clinic door. She had a radiant face, a full, round face with high cheekbones and large hazel-green eyes with gold flecks that caught the harsh fluorescent light. A faint scar cut across her chin, a jagged memory from a frightened pit bull when she was 14. Her thick, dark, chestnut-brown hair was always wrangled into a messy, heavy braid that fell over one broad shoulder. She wore deep, navy-blue medical scrubs, the fabric soft from 100 washes, and around her neck hung a crimson-red lanyard, bright as arterial blood, holding her ID badge. She was a woman of substance, broad shoulders, a very full bust, a soft waist, and wide hips, a size 18, a body built for comfort, for holding, for bearing the weight of things. When she stepped out into the damp night air, the exhaustion would finally settle into her bones. But she did not go straight home. She never did. She walked to her car, a dented 2011 Honda Civic that hummed with a rattling, asthmatic wheeze when the ignition turned over. The heater barely worked, blowing lukewarm air against her chilled hands. She pulled out of the clinic parking lot and drove through the rain-slicked streets of the city, the streetlights smearing into long, golden streaks across her windshield. She drove past the sleeping neighborhoods, past the closed storefronts, past the quiet corners of the world, until she reached the edge of the heights. Here, the streetlights grew further apart, the trees grew taller, older, thicker, and the walls grew higher. This was the Valenti Estate, the most heavily guarded compound on the eastern seaboard. It was a fortress of wrought iron and cold stone, surrounded by towering oaks and a perimeter wall that bristled with security cameras. It was not a place for ordinary people. It was a place where power slept, where violence was a currency, where men like Matteo Valenti ruled an empire built on blood and silence. Gianna did not care about the estate. She did not care about the cameras that tracked her dented Civic as it pulled to the shoulder of the road near the ornate back gate. She did not care about the men in dark suits who surely watched her on their monitors. She turned off the engine. The silence was immediate and profound. She reached into the passenger seat and picked up a small, heavy tin of premium ocean whitefish cat food. She pulled the crimson-red lanyard over her head, leaving it on the dashboard. She stepped out into the mist. The drainage culvert was a concrete pipe tucked beneath the massive stone pillars of the back gate. It was dark, choked with damp leaves and the smell of wet earth. Gianna crouched in the wet grass. Her knees popped softly in the quiet night. She did not mind the cold moisture seeping into her navy scrubs. She clicked her tongue against the roof of her mouth, a soft, rhythmic sound. "Nessuno," she whispered. The word plumed in the cold air. Nobody. For a long time, there was only the sound of the wind through the oaks. And then, from the shadows of the culvert, two eyes caught the ambient light of the street lamp. One was a pale, milky orb, The other was a sharp, piercing yellow. He was a feral tomcat, roughly 8 years old, though life on the streets made him look ancient. He was a patchwork of grey and white, his coat matted and stiff with dirt. His right ear was completely missing, torn away in some long-forgotten battle. His left ear was a jagged triangle of rust red. He was a creature of violence, a survivor of a brutal world that had tried to kill him 100 times over. He had bitten every guard who had tried to shoo him away. He had drawn blood from the groundskeepers. He trusted absolutely no one, except her. He crept out of the pipe, his belly low to the wet grass, his one good eye fixed on her. He did not run. He did not hiss. He moved with a slow, deliberate caution, closing the distance between them, inch by inch. It wasn't a transaction. It wasn't a game. It was a silent communion between two souls who understood the value of showing up. Gianna popped the lid off the tin. The smell of fish filled the air. She set it down gently. Nessuno approached, his nose twitching, but he did not eat immediately. Instead, he stepped over the tin, walked to where Gianna was crouched, and pressed his scarred, bony head against her knee. He pushed his weight into her leg, a heavy, solid pressure. And then the sound began, a low, rumbling purr that vibrated like an idling engine. Gianna smiled, a soft, radiant expression that transformed her face. She reached out with her strong, capable hands and stroked the thick fur along his spine. "There you are, handsome," she murmured, her voice a warm blanket in the cold night. "I knew you'd wait." She had been doing this for 11 weeks, every single night. Nobody had asked her to. Nobody knew. She remembered the first night. She had been driving home after a double shift, 16 hours on her feet, 3 surgeries, 1 euthanasia that had gutted her because the dog had licked her hand as it went. She was crying, not sobbing, just leaking, the way you do when you're so tired that your body gives up pretending. Her headlights had swept across the culvert as she rounded the curve, and she'd seen 2 eyes reflecting back. She had pulled over. She had sat in her car for 10 minutes, engine running, telling herself to go home, to sleep, to stop collecting broken things. But Gianna had been collecting broken things since she was 6 years old. Her father, a plumber from Bensonhurst who smelled like copper pipe and Old Spice, had found her in the backyard one morning, sitting in the dirt in her church dress, feeding a wounded pigeon out of her cereal bowl. He hadn't told her to stop. He had sat down beside her, ruined his own church pants, and said, "Some things need someone to show up for them, G, even if they can't say thank you." Her father had died of a heart attack when she was 19. He had been 47, too young, too sudden. No goodbye, no warning, just a phone call from the hospital while she was studying for an anatomy exam. She had dropped out of pre-vet school because the money dried up. She had clawed her way into the vet tech program at the community college, working nights at a gas station to pay for it. She had graduated. She had survived, but she had never stopped collecting broken things, because every stray she fed, every wounded creature she held through the night, was a prayer to a man who had taught her that showing up was the only religion that mattered. So that first night, she had gotten out of the car. She had walked to the culvert with a protein bar in her pocket, the only food she had. She had broken it into pieces and left it on the ground. The eyes had watched, nothing else. She came back the next night with cat food, and the next, and the next. For 2 weeks, Nessuno wouldn't come within 10 feet of her. By the 4th week, he would eat while she sat nearby. By the 7th, he let her speak to him. By the 9th, he pressed his head against her knee. By the 11th, tonight, he climbed into her lap and purred like a diesel engine. She did it because she saw a creature that the world had discarded, and she refused to let him be invisible. She did it because her father had taught her that love is not a feeling. Love is a thing you do, night after night, in the dark, when nobody is watching. Above her, hidden in the shadows of the 3rd-floor balcony of the Valenti mansion, a man was watching. Matteo Valenti was 36 years old, and he was utterly, profoundly miserable. He was the Don, the boss, the king of an empire he had never wanted to inherit. His father had died violently when he was 15. His mother had faded away from grief and illness 2 years ago. He was alone in a fortress filled with people. Tomorrow morning, he was going to marry Vivian Caulfield. He stood on the stone balcony, barefoot, the cold biting into the soles of his feet. He wore grey sweatpants and a black long-sleeved Henley that stretched tight across his massive shoulders and powerful chest. He was built like a heavyweight fighter, 6'3", muscular, imposing. His dark black hair was cropped close on the sides, longer on top, pushed back by restless hands. A thin white scar sliced through his left eyebrow, the lingering signature of a car bomb that had nearly taken his life at 22. His strong jaw was rough, with stubble trending toward a short, dark beard. His deep, brown-black eyes were exhausted, hollowed out by insomnia and the crushing weight of a crown he despised. In his right hand, he held a heavy crystal glass of scotch. He hadn't taken a sip in 10 minutes. His eyes were locked on the security monitors earlier, but now he was watching the live feed with his own eyes. The back gate, the culvert, the woman. He had seen her for the first time 7 days ago. He had been standing exactly here, unable to sleep, dreading the impending wedding. He had looked down and seen the dented Honda pull up. He had watched the woman step out. He had watched her crouch in the dirt, wearing those unremarkable navy scrubs, and he had watched, in absolute stunned disbelief, as the feral beast that had shredded his head of security's leather glove walked right up to her and climbed into her lap. He watched her now. He watched the way she moved. It was slow, steady, non-threatening. It was the way you handled a wild, frightened thing. You didn't demand its attention. You didn't force your will upon it. You simply made a space for it, and you waited to see if it would choose to fill it. Matteo swallowed hard. The scotch in his glass caught the moonlight. The woman was beautiful. Even from this distance, he could see the radiant curve of her face, the heavy fall of her chestnut braid. But it wasn't just her beauty that kept him anchored to the stone balcony. It was her devotion. She was feeding the cat, murmuring to it. The cat was purring. Matteo could almost feel the vibration of it in his own chest. "Who are you?" he thought, his voice a rough whisper in the empty night. "Why do you keep coming back?" He did not go down. Not yet. He stood in the cold, a king in a cage, watching a woman in the mud offer grace to a monster. The next morning broke grey and heavy, the sky a bruised canvas of oppressive clouds. Inside the master suite of the Valenti estate, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and unspoken dread. In the center of the vast, immaculate room stood a mahogany valet stand. Draped over it was a custom-tailored charcoal three-piece suit. The fabric was spun from the finest Italian wool, dark as slate, flawless in its construction. Beside it lay a crisp white shirt, a silver silk tie, and a pair of polished black Oxfords that gleamed like wet obsidian. It was the armor of a man going to his execution. Matteo sat on the edge of his massive, unmade bed, staring at the suit. He had not slept. His eyes felt full of sand. The heavy crystal Scotch glass sat empty on the nightstand, beside a thick stack of legal documents bound in a leather folder. The prenup. The door to the suite opened without a knock. Sal walked in, bustling with a frantic, nervous energy. Sal was 52, stocky, with thick silver hair and reading glasses perched on the end of a bulbous nose. He was the consigliere, the architect of the Valenti family's political maneuvers, and the man who had arranged this marriage. "Matteo," Sal barked, checking a gold pocket watch. "The cars are out front. We need to move. Vivian's father just called. The senator is already at the church. Half the city council is there. It's a circus, but it's our circus." Matteo didn't move. He stared at the charcoal suit. His phone, lying on the mattress beside him, vibrated. The screen lit up. "Vivian, Matthew, please tell your driver to bring the vintage rolls. not the armored SUV. The SUV ruins the aesthetic for the photos. She called him Matthew. She had always called him Matthew. They had met exactly 3 times. Once at a fundraiser, once at a sterile dinner arranged by Sal, and once at the engagement party, where they had spoken for a total of 12 minutes. She was 30, tall, thin, blonde, blue-eyed, draped in designer silk and diamonds. She was not a villain. She was a transaction. A strategic alliance. She wanted the endless wealth of the Valenti Empire. Matteo needed the political immunity her father's Senate seat could provide. It was business. It was survival. It was a death sentence. "Matteo," Sal prodded, stepping closer, his brow furrowing. "You all right, boss?" Matteo finally looked up. His deep, brown-black eyes were empty. "Sal." His voice was low, rough, like gravel scraping over iron. "That cat, down by the back gate." Sal blinked, completely derailed by the non sequitur. "The feral thing? The one that bit Russo? What about it?" "We've been trying to trap it and get rid of it for months. Animal control won't even go near the damn culvert anymore." Matteo looked back at the suit. "Leave it." "Leave the cat?" Sal asked, bewildered. "Leave it," Matteo repeated. The command absolute. Nobody touches it. Nobody goes near the culvert. Sal threw his hands up in a gesture of exasperated compliance. "Fine. The cat lives. Now put the suit on, Matteo. The senator is waiting." An hour later, the charcoal suit was on. The tie was knotted. The armor was sealed. Matteo stood in the vestibule of the massive, echoing cathedral of St. Jude. The air was thick with the suffocating smell of lilies and burning beeswax candles. The organ was playing a low, rumbling prelude. Beyond the heavy oak doors of the sanctuary, 500 people waited to witness a lie. Sal stood beside him, adjusting his own cuffs. "This is a good day, Matteo. A new chapter. The family is secure. You're doing the right thing." Matteo stared at the intricate brass handles of the sanctuary doors. The organ music swelled, signaling the impending procession. In a few moments, those doors would open. Vivienne would walk down the aisle. The transaction would be finalized. He closed his eyes. He didn't see Vivienne. He didn't see the senator. He didn't see the empire. He saw a woman in navy blue scrubs, crouching in the wet grass at 11:15 p.m. He saw the crimson-red lanyard. He saw the heavy braid of chestnut hair over her broad shoulder. He saw her large, hazel-green eyes, warm and golden, looking down at a broken, scarred creature with nothing but absolute, unconditional devotion. Some creatures survive not because they are wanted, but because they refuse to stop showing up. He realized, with a sudden, violent clarity, that he was the cat. He was feral, scarred, alone, trapped in a cage of his own making, biting anyone who tried to get close. And he was about to lock himself in that cage forever, with a woman who didn't even know his real name. The organ hit a triumphant, deafening chord. The ushers reached for the brass handles of the oak doors. "Stop," Matteo said. The word was not loud, but it cut through the heavy air like a gunshot. The ushers froze. Sal turned, his silver hair catching the dim light, his eyes wide behind his reading glasses. "Matteo?" Sal whispered, panic edging into his voice. "What are you doing?" Matteo reached up and loosened the silver silk tie. He unbuttoned the collar of the crisp white shirt. The suffocating pressure in his chest suddenly broke, replaced by a massive, rushing intake of oxygen. "I'm not doing this," Matteo said, his voice rough, steady, and alive for the first time in years. "You can't be serious," Sal hissed, grabbing Matteo's arm. "The senator is in there. The bishop is in there. You are making an alliance." Matteo looked at Sal, his dark eyes burning with a fierce, terrifying resolve. It wasn't an alliance. It was a surrender. And I'm done surrendering. He pulled his arm out of Sal's grip. He turned away from the heavy oak doors. "Tell the senator to go home," Matteo said over his shoulder, his massive strides eating up the distance to the cathedral exit. "Tell Vivienne she can keep the ring. Tell everyone the wedding is off." "Mateo," Sal shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "You can't just walk away. What are you going to do?" Mateo pushed open the doors to the street, stepping out into the gray, bruising daylight. "I'm going home," he said. "I have an appointment at 11:15. The rain returned that night, a slow, relentless drizzle that slicked the streets and turned the city into a watercolor painting of smeared lights and deep shadows. At exactly 11:15 p.m., the dented 2011 Honda Civic pulled to the shoulder of the road near the Valenti Estate's back gate. The engine rattled, coughed, and died. Gianna Ferro sat behind the wheel for a moment, listening to the rain tap against the windshield. She was exhausted. It had been a brutal shift. A golden retriever with a twisted stomach, a stray kitten that hadn't made it. Her broad shoulders ached, and her fair, white, glowing skin felt tight with fatigue. But she did not go home. She grabbed the tin of ocean whitefish from the passenger seat, pulled her oversized gray hoodie over her scrubs, and stepped out into the rain. The crimson lanyard hung heavy against her chest. She walked to the massive wrought-iron gate, her boots sinking into the wet earth. The security cameras watched her, their red LEDs blinking like unblinking eyes. She ignored them. She knelt by the drainage culvert. "Nessuno," she called softly, clicking her tongue. The feral tomcat emerged immediately. He didn't even wait for the tin to be opened. He walked straight to her, his matted gray and white body rubbing fiercely against her shins, his missing ear giving him a lopsided, endearing profile. "Hey, handsome," Gianna murmured, her radiant face breaking into a soft smile. She popped the tin and set it on the ground. Nessuno began to eat, his one yellow eye keeping watch, his rumbling purr vibrating through the wet grass. Gianna crouched there in the rain, stroking his spine, letting the quiet of the night wash away the chaos of the clinic. And then, a sound broke the silence. It was the crunch of gravel. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Gianna froze. Her hands stopped moving on the cat's back. The sound was coming from inside the estate, from behind the massive, impenetrable wall. She looked up. Through the thick iron bars of the back gate, a figure emerged from the shadows of the towering oak trees. Gianna's breath hitched in her throat. She stood up slowly, her hands instinctively curling into fists at her sides. It was a man. He was massive, built like a fortress, his broad shoulders filling the space between the iron bars. He was dressed in charcoal suit trousers and a crisp white dress shirt, though the shirt was entirely untucked, clinging wetly to his powerful chest. He wore no jacket, he wore no tie, and, most unnerving of all, he was barefoot. His large feet stood firmly on the wet, muddy grass inside the compound. The rain plastered his dark black hair to his forehead. The white scar through his left eyebrow stood out starkly in the dim light. His strong jaw was clenched, his deep, brown-black eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made the air feel thin. He looked dangerous, he looked powerful, but more than that, he looked broken, exhausted, human. Gianna didn't run. She stood her ground, her hazel-green eyes wide but unafraid. Nessuno stopped eating. The cat stepped between Gianna and the iron gate, letting out a low, warning hiss at the massive man. The man looked down at the cat, then back up to Gianna. He didn't speak immediately. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the rain and the unspoken weight of the night. "He doesn't let anyone touch him," the man finally said. His voice was shockingly low, a rough, grating sound that rumbled like distant thunder. Gianna swallowed, forcing her racing heart to steady. "He does now," she replied, her voice calm, clear, the same tone she used to soothe terrified mastiffs. "It just took time." The man stepped closer to the gate. The iron bars were the only thing separating them. "They told me he's feral, a stray, that he bites." "He was protecting himself," Gianna said, lifting her chin. Her oversized hoodie was soaked, her thick chestnut braid heavy with rain. "When the world only gives you a reason to fight, fighting is all you know how to do, until someone gives you a reason to stop." Matteo Valenti gripped the iron bars of the gate. The cold metal bit into his palms. He stared at this woman. She was not a supermodel. She was not a senator's daughter draped in silk. She was a veterinary technician with a scar on her chin, standing in the mud in cheap scrubs, smelling of rain and cat food. And she was the most breathtaking thing he had ever seen. Her fair white skin glowed in the ambient light. Her full, round face was radiant with a quiet, unshakable strength. She was solid. She was real. "You come here every night," Matteo said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Gianna said. "Why?" Gianna looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes. She saw the way his massive shoulders slumped infinitesimally under an invisible weight. She saw the barefoot Don standing in the rain, seeking shelter he didn't know how to ask for. "Because nobody else was going to," Gianna said simply, "and he was hungry." Matteo's chest tightened. A sharp, physical ache bloomed behind his ribs. He looked at the feral cat, sitting at the feet of this beautiful, plus-size woman who had claimed him not with force, but with patience. "What's his name?" Matteo asked. "Nessuno," she said softly. "It means—" "I know what it means," Matteo interrupted, the Italian rolling smoothly off his tongue. "Nobody." He looked back at her hazel-green eyes. "I'm Matteo," he said. The words felt foreign. He hadn't introduced himself as just a man in decades. He was always the boss, the Don, Mr. Valenti. Gianna tilted her head slightly. She didn't gasp. She didn't recognize the name of the most feared man on the eastern seaboard. Or if she did, she didn't care. "I'm Gianna," she said. Between them, the heavy iron gate remained locked. But something else, something invisible and ancient, had just swung wide open. 4 days later, 2 a.m., the East Side 24-hour animal emergency clinic was quiet. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Gianna was at the stainless steel examination table in room 3, wiping it down with disinfectant. Her shoulders ached. Her crimson lanyard swayed as she worked. The chime above the front door rang, a sharp, piercing sound in the dead of night. Gianna tossed the wipe into the biohazard bin and walked out to the reception area. She stopped dead in her tracks. Standing in the small, brightly lit waiting room was Matteo Valenti. He was wearing a custom-tailored black suit this time, the jacket unbuttoned, no tie. He looked massive in the cramped clinic space, his broad shoulders nearly touching the display racks of prescription dog food. But it wasn't his imposing size or the dark, dangerous aura of the man that caught her attention. It was what he was holding. Pressed against his powerful chest, wrapped tightly in a thick, expensive gray cashmere sweater, was Nessuno. The feral cat was visibly distressed, panting heavily, his one yellow eye wide with panic. His back right leg hung at an awkward, unnatural angle. Gianna didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. Her professional instincts overrode her shock. "Bring him back," she ordered, her voice sharp, commanding, stripping away any pretense of intimidation. She didn't care that this man was a billionaire mob boss. Right now, he was just a guy holding a hurt animal. Matteo followed her immediately. He didn't argue. He didn't demand to see a doctor. He followed the woman in the navy scrubs into examination room 3. "Set him on the table," Gianna instructed, snapping a pair of latex gloves onto her hands. "Slowly, keep the sweater over his head so he can't see the lights." Matteo did as he was told. His massive hands, hands that had ordered the destruction of empires, moved with excruciating gentleness as he lowered the bundle onto the cold steel table. Nessuno let out a low, guttural yowl of pain. "Hold his scruff," Gianna said, stepping close to Matteo, so close she could smell his cologne, sandalwood, scotch, and rain. "Firmly, but don't choke him. I need to look at the leg." Matteo held the cat's scruff, his massive hand dwarfing the animal's neck. He watched Gianna work. He watched her completely ignore his status, his money, his power. She was in her element. She was confident, skilled, in absolute control. Her fair, glowing skin was illuminated by the harsh overhead examination light. Her large, hazel-green eyes were narrowed in intense concentration. He watched her hands. They were strong hands, capable hands. They moved over the cat's broken leg with a delicate, probing firmness. Nesuno hissed, thrashing wildly, his claws tearing a deep gash into the cashmere sweater and grazing Matteo's wrist, drawing a thin line of blood. Gianna didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She didn't raise her voice. "I know, Nesuno, I know," she murmured, her voice dropping an octave, slipping into that warm, vibrating frequency she used in the culvert. "It hurts. I'm sorry. I've got you." Matteo felt a jolt go through his chest. It was a physical impact, harder than any punch he had ever taken. He realized, staring at her profile, that she handled frightened, dangerous creatures with the exact same patient, steady, non-threatening presence every single time. She didn't punish the cat for lashing out in pain. She absorbed it. She understood it. He recognized it with a violent clarity, because that was exactly what he needed. He was surrounded by sycophants who wanted his money, enemies who wanted his life, and family members who wanted his influence. Nobody just wanted him. He was a feral, dangerous thing, lashing out at a world that constantly demanded pieces of him. But this woman, this beautiful, thick, radiant woman, she wouldn't flinch, she wouldn't rush him, she wouldn't demand. "It's a clean fracture," Gianna said, pulling him out of his thoughts. She looked up, her hazel eyes locking onto his dark brown ones. She noticed the blood on his wrist. "He got you." "I've had worse," Matteo said, his rough voice quiet in the small room. "I need to sedate him, take x-rays, and cast it," Gianna said, moving to a lockbox on the wall. "How did it happen?" "A coyote," Matteo said. His jaw tightened. "Got onto the grounds near the culvert. I heard the fight from the balcony. I went down." Gianna paused, a syringe in her hand. She looked at him, really looked at him. This massive, terrifying man, who ruled the city with an iron fist, had run out into the night to save a stray cat. "You saved him," she said softly. "He's yours," Matteo said simply, his deep eyes never leaving her face. "I wasn't going to let anything take what's yours." Gianna's breath caught. A heavy, electric silence filled the sterile room. It wasn't a threat. It was a vow. She turned back to the table, her hands trembling slightly for the first time all night. She administered the sedative. Nesuno's frantic breathing slowly evened out. His one good eye fluttered closed. "You can let go now, Matteo," she whispered. He released the cat's scruff. He stood beside her as she worked, silent, immense, a shadow standing guard over her light. She didn't ask him to leave. And he didn't want to be anywhere else. The fallout from the cancelled wedding was apocalyptic. In the wood-paneled library of the Valenti estate, Sal was pacing a trench into the Persian rug. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the frantic ringing of burner phones. "The senator is threatening a federal audit of the port contracts," Sal shouted, slamming a fist onto the mahogany desk. "Vivienne's brothers are talking to the Rossi family in Brooklyn. We look weak, Matteo. You left her at the altar. You humiliated them." Matteo sat in a high-backed leather chair, a glass of scotch resting on his knee. He wore his grey sweatpants and black Henley. He looked completely unbothered. "Let them audit," Matteo rumbled, taking a slow sip. "Let the Rossis talk. If they step over the bridge, we crush them." "This isn't a war we need to fight," Sal pleaded, pulling off his reading glasses and rubbing his eyes. "Call Vivienne, apologize, buy her a yacht, reschedule the wedding for next month. It's the only way to fix this politically." Matteo set the heavy crystal glass down on the desk with a sharp crack that silenced the room. "There will be no wedding, Sal," Matteo said, his voice deadly quiet, vibrating with absolute authority. "I am not marrying Vivienne Caulfield. The transaction is void. Do not bring it up again." Sal stared at him, terrified by the icy, unshakable calm in the don't eyes. Why, Matteo? What changed? You understood the stakes last week. Matteo looked toward the library windows, toward the rain lashing against the glass. I woke up, he said. Meanwhile, across the city, in a modest, cramped apartment above a bakery, Gianna Ferro was standing in front of a cheap, full-length mirror. Her shift at the clinic didn't start for another 2 hours. Nessuno was currently asleep, in a soft crate in the corner of her bedroom, a neon green cast on his back leg, purring contentedly. Gianna looked at her reflection. She was wearing her oversized grey hoodie and sweatpants. She looked tired. She felt heavy. She walked to her tiny closet and pushed aside the rows of deep navy blue scrubs. Way in the back, hanging in a plastic dry cleaning bag, was a dress. She pulled it out. It was a wine-red wrap dress, made of a heavy, luxurious jersey fabric that draped and flowed like liquid. She had bought it 3 years ago for her sister's wedding. She had paid too much for it. $127 she didn't have. Charged to a credit card she was still paying off. But when the morning of the wedding came, she had stood in this same mirror, in this same dress, and the world had spoken in her aunt's voice, in her ex-boyfriend's voice, in the voice of every magazine and every movie and every stranger who had ever looked at a plus-size woman and decided she was less. You take up too much space. You look ridiculous. Nobody wants to see that. Hide. She had taken the dress off. She had put on a shapeless black pantsuit. She had gone to her sister's wedding and stood in the corner and smiled and danced and pretended that the wine-red dress hanging in her closet, with its price tag still on, was a choice she could live with. But it wasn't a choice. It was a cage. It was her own version of the locked gate, a barrier she had built around herself, not with iron bars, but with shame, and the shame wasn't even hers. It had been given to her, piece by piece, by a world that measured a woman's worth in inches and pounds, and the distance between her thighs. Gianna stared at the tag. She thought of Nessuno, a one-eared, half-blind, scarred feral cat who had survived coyotes and winters and the cruelty of a world that didn't want him. He hadn't survived because he was beautiful. He had survived because he refused to stop being alive. She thought of a massive, barefoot man standing in the rain on the other side of an iron gate, looking at her as if she were the only real thing in a world of ghosts. He hadn't looked at her body and seen something to hide. He had looked at her and seen something to come home to. When the world only gives you a reason to fight, fighting is all you know how to do, until someone gives you a reason to stop. She reached up and grabbed the cardboard price tag. $127. 3 years of cowardice, a lifetime of borrowed shame. With a sharp, decisive tug, she ripped it off. She stripped off the hoodie and sweatpants. She stepped into the wine-red dress. She pulled the wrap tight across her soft waist, tying it in a secure knot at her hip. The fabric clung to her very full bust, cascading over her wide hips, falling elegantly to her calves. The deep crimson color made her fair, white, glowing skin look like porcelain, bringing out the gold flecks in her large hazel-green eyes. She let her thick, dark, chestnut-brown hair out of its messy braid, shaking it loose until it fell in heavy, glorious waves over her bare, broad shoulders. The faint dog-bite scar on her chin didn't look like a flaw anymore. It looked like a badge of survival. She looked in the mirror. She didn't see a woman who took up too much space. She saw a woman of substance, a woman who was beautiful, strong, and entirely worthy of being seen. She grabbed her keys. It was raining, but she didn't care. She had an appointment at the gate, 11:15 p.m. The rain was falling in thick, heavy sheets, drumming a relentless rhythm against the roof of the dented 2011 Honda Civic. Gianna parked on the shoulder of the road, near the Valenti estate. The back gate loomed in the darkness, an imposing iron cage against the stormy sky. She didn't have the tin of cat food tonight. Nessuno was safe in her apartment. She didn't have her scrubs. She didn't have her hoodie. She stepped out of the car. The rain immediately soaked into her hair, plastering the heavy chestnut waves to her neck. The wine-red wrap dress darkened as it absorbed the water, clinging to every lush curve of her body, outlining her full bust and soft hips in a stunning, statuesque silhouette. She walked to the gate. She stood in the mud. She waited. Inside the compound, Matteo Valenti was not on his balcony. He was not drinking scotch in the library. He was walking down the long, winding gravel path toward the perimeter wall. He was wearing the charcoal three-piece suit. The wedding suit. The jacket was soaked, the vest unbuttoned, the crisp white shirt plastered to his massive chest. He was barefoot again, the sharp gravel digging into his soles, but he didn't feel it. He felt only the magnetic, irresistible pull of the edge of his property. He rounded the corner of the oak trees and saw her. Matteo stopped dead. The breath was punched out of his lungs. She was standing on the other side of the iron bars, drenched in the rain. The wine-red dress clung to her like a second skin. Her radiant, fair face was tipped up to the stormy sky. Her hazel eyes locked onto him. She looked like a goddess of the storm, a beautiful, plus-size siren who had come to drag a drowning king to the surface. Matteo walked to the gate. He didn't stop a few feet away like last time. He walked right up to the iron bars, his massive hands wrapping around the cold metal. They stood there, separated by an inch of iron and a world of violence. "You didn't bring the food," Matteo rumbled, his rough voice barely audible over the driving rain. "He's sleeping," Gianna said, her chest heaving, the wet fabric of the dress stretching tight. "He's safe." "Then why are you here?" Matteo asked, his dark brown-black eyes dropping to her lips, then snapping back to her eyes. The intensity of his gaze was a physical weight. Gianna didn't flinch. She stepped closer, until her toes were practically touching the iron bars. "Because I'm not finished showing up." Matteo closed his eyes. A ragged, shuddering breath tore out of his chest. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was recognition, like looking into a mirror and seeing the same jagged cracks. She saw the monster, and she didn't run. She saw the stray, and she stayed in the rain. He opened his eyes. He let go of the bars. He reached into his soaked suit trousers and pulled out a heavy iron key. He inserted it into the ancient, rusted lock of the back gate. He turned it. The mechanism let out a loud, grinding clack that echoed through the storm. Matteo pushed the heavy iron gate. It swung outward, screaming on its hinges, opening the fortress for the first time in a decade. He didn't stand inside and motion for her to enter. He didn't pull her into his world. He stepped through the gate. He stepped out of his empire, out of his cage, and planted his bare feet in the mud on the shoulder of the public road, right by her side. The open gate stood behind him, his empire on one side, her on the other. He chose. He extended his massive, scarred, trembling right hand. Gianna looked at it, the hand that commanded an army, the hand that had bled for a feral cat. She lifted her strong, capable hand and placed it in his. The first touch was seismic. It was a jolt of pure, blinding electricity that shot up Matteo's arm and exploded in his chest. His massive fingers closed gently, reverently around hers. She was warm. She was solid. She was real. With a low, desperate groan, Matteo stepped into her space. He wrapped his massive arms around her broad shoulders, pulling her flush against his powerful chest. Gianna gasped as the breath was squeezed from her, but she didn't pull away. She wrapped her arms around his thick waist, burying her face into the crook of his neck, breathing in the scent of rain and sandalwood. He buried his face in her wet chestnut hair. "Gianna," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Gianna." It was a surrender, a true, complete surrender, and it was the first time in his life he had ever felt free. Flash forward, Saturday morning. The sprawling, state-of-the-art kitchen of the Valenti estate was bathed in warm, golden sunlight. The smell of freshly brewed espresso filled the air. Gianna sat on the edge of the massive marble island counter. She was wearing Matteo's black Henley, the sleeves rolled up past her elbows, the hem dropping mid-thigh over her bare, thick legs. Her dark chestnut hair was tied up in a messy bun. Her fair, glowing skin was radiant in the morning light. Beside her on the cold marble, Nessuno the cat was curled into a tight ball, fast asleep. His neon green cast stuck out comically. The feral beast, the terror of the groundskeepers, was currently purring so loudly he vibrated, domesticated by devotion. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the sprawling back lawns were visible. At the very edge of the property, the wrought iron back gate stood wide open, bathed in the morning sun. It would never be locked again. Matteo stood between Gianna's knees. He was wearing grey sweatpants, barefoot, his massive shoulders relaxed, the crushing weight of the empire entirely absent from his posture. He held 2 ceramic mugs of espresso. He handed one to her. He didn't step back. He stayed right there, trapped happily between the soft thighs of the woman he loved. He looked up at her, his deep brown-black eyes warm, soft, looking at her as if she had personally invented sunlight. He reached up with his free hand and gently traced the faint dog-bite scar on her chin. Gianna leaned into his touch, her hazel eyes fluttering closed, a soft smile playing on her full lips. Some creatures survive, not because they are wanted, but because they refuse to stop showing up. They endure the dark, the cold, the violence, and the silence. But every now and then, if they wait long enough, someone walks into the rain and sees them. She showed up every night at 11:15, and one night, he finally opened the gate. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and type "The Stray" if you loved this story.